jump into Google Analytics 4. We're going to start really basic and go from. So what is an event? In Google Analytics 4, an event refers to a specific action or interaction that occurs on the website. That can be anything from a click to an add to the cart to a first session. For your WordPress websites, tracking events are really important to measure your interaction. And you can do that sequentially, where you can literally see what everybody is doing on your website to figure out, how they're interacting, what's their user behavior. To get a little bit deeper, an event has 4 different components. It has the timestamp, the name, the parameters, and the properties for the user. So the event parameters and the user properties are essentially like your metadata, where your user has all the different fields from their demographics to their user roles. And for the event, it's everything from the page refer to the duration of the video watch to the amount of the scroll. And that's really important because what do these events comprise of? That is a session. So a session is comprised of a cohesive bundle of event level data in a specific time window. So the way a session works in UA was anything could reset a session. It could be midnight and it would have to restart. It could clear your cookies or log out, or even just click another data source that leads people to your website, and that would start a new session. Instead, with GA4, it's based on events, and the way it ends a session is by a period of inactivity. So it's default at 30 minutes, and it can be as short as 5 minutes, and it can be as long as 7 hours and 55 minutes. But note, there's no limit to how long a session can last. So theoretically, a session could last infinitely until that inactivity occurred. Moving forward, navigating the GA4 report. So the GA4 reports is basically the host of off-the-shelf reporting that is available. In UA, this was much easier to navigate. But I feel like the GA4 reports are doing most of the job that you previously had in UA, albeit sometimes you have to find it in a different location or maybe through a different name. And then even some of the naming conventions aren't necessarily straightforward. So jumping right into it, there's the snapshot in real time. So snapshot is kind of just your overall summary dashboard. That's where you're going to have the main widgets, just of how many users are coming to your website, as well as maybe potentially some AI insights that are provided by GA4. Real-time analytics is going to be the last 30 minutes on your website in 1-minute intervals. And it's basically, you're going to see where people are on a map, how many people are coming in, where they're coming in, as well as the events that they are completing. This is also a really good place to test in QA when you're doing when you're creating new events or doing new things on your website. Acquisition is how users are discovering your website, and then also throughout the session, how they're coming into how they're coming in and out of a session through your website. So what I mean by that is the user acquisition is where the user first comes in. So that's like kind of like first touch attribution for that exact user. Whereas the traffic acquisition it better named session acquisition, but they just say traffic. And that's where the session is. So essentially those two together give you a better view of where your customers are coming from. And maybe, for instance, if you have an e-commerce website, you have somebody checking out right before, but they're looking for a coupon and they happen to go to an affiliate website. Well, you can see that last touch attribution, or the last touch isn't necessarily what brought the user to the website, but maybe something that happens right before checkout. And that's important because in engagement, the next section, it's tracking your user interaction behaviors, and most importantly, probably your customer journey as well as your conversion. So that's where you're really going to get to see the important statistics of what was previously bounce rate, but was now called engagement rate. And just to explain that real quick, bounce rate is pretty much the opposite of engagement rate. So complementary, they create the whole basis of your website. So somebody is either in a bounce or an engagement. So that's where you're gonna be looking at session duration, page views, all that good stuff. Monetization is where you're gonna find all your financial performance and goal completion. So that's what you get to set up. A lot of the times it's purchases, you might have subscriptions, some type of form that you have to fill out. That's where you're gonna find your KPIs. And if you're spending money, that's also where you're gonna find your important KPIs like CPA, which is a cost per acquisition, or ROAS, return on ad spend. And that's really good stuff there. We're going to go into a little deeper and how GA4 can actually import data so that you can see all of your company's data in one place. Retention is assessing user loyalty and retention. Essentially what that is just one table, one dashboard, essentially an overall where there's various widgets that show churn rates and how users come back to your website. I haven't necessarily found this area very helpful yet because it's not really customized to your website, but I'm sure there's websites out there that it would work for currently. I'm looking for more customization here in the future and probably look forward to it. The next section is going to be user attributes. This is where you're going to find your basic demographic and behavioral data. That's where you're going to understand characteristics, everything from where somebody is located, not like that. Lastly, there's tech, and that's going to examine the technology landscape, of course, devices and all that good stuff there, which browsers people are coming on and everything like that. So here's just a few examples. We couldn't really go through everything today because we really did want to get through as much as we could. So just at the top, acquisition, that's one example of an acquisition report. And what you can see is the user acquisition. So this is where everybody is going to come from. And I see now that it's on default channel group, but you can also switch that to source, medium, or campaign, as well as a few other options. The engagement report on the left, it quantifies all the aggregate interactions. We kind of just reviewed this. And it's also important to see where people are interacting with your website. Each of those events on the left, as you can see, they're like a link where they're blue with an underline. You can actually click on each of those events and get more information specifically about that event as well as its metadata. Really cool stuff there to look into. And the next one is monetization on the right. Monetization is really in terms of how you're spending your money. So what's cool about this specific example is it's actually something like the funnel to purchase journey. So what you see there is each level or each step of the way to a purchase, and the abandonment rate at each step. So this is actually set currently to city, and that's important if you're doing certain things like figuring out which area people convert most best, and that also has several options that you can choose between. And lastly is just an example of a few of those retention-based widgets. Like I said, they're thought-provoking, and they might be topical for some, but I have not found out how to use them, particularly for myself yet, based on specific business. Moving on to the Explore tab. So what we just reviewed was all the off-the-shelf reports. What the Explore tab is where you're going to create those custom reports. And I personally always thought UA could be a little bit better in terms of the simplification. I think maybe GA4 oversimplified it a bit too much, and it does feel a little restricted. But just to review these real quick, we're going to just go over the technique templates, which is the top group, and then we'll briefly touch on the bottom. Path exploration, again, that's what we kind of saw right before, where you can just take different segments and filter different groups of people, and then look at kind of what's their user experience across a set of web pages or a set of events, things of that nature. The funnel exploration is very great for for conversion rate, where you can look at what types of folks for different marketing campaigns or from different places on your website are converting the best. Cohort Explorer and User Lifetime. Those are where you're going to identify your most engaged users. And what's great about these, you can really see on aggregate how these different groups of people perform, and especially when they've come to your website and when they check out, and the effectiveness, of course, of your marketing. The next is user and segment overlap. So User Explorer is really interesting because this is actually where GA4 kind of is really steps ahead of the rest, because you're looking at the individual users' data. You're looking at their individual events, and you're looking at it so like I was saying, so the User Explorer is really important because it's where you get to see an individual user and how they're interacting with your website. So it's every event in October, and it's really great because you can then start to see, wow, this is how people are interacting with my website. It's not this aggregate group of what I thought people are doing. Not everybody's the same. Everyone interacts with it differently. Really cool to see, especially when you start looking at a lot of them. Segment overlap is also really important. It's where you're identifying target audiences. And that's actually a place where you can also create new audiences, which you can then later use in your Google Ads. Freeform, last of all, is kind of the open-ended version. I wish it was a bit more open-ended currently than it is currently, but you're able to do most of what you want here and get to most of your answers, though it may be a little bit difficult to get there. What I do advise here is to try and spend as much time, if this is your vocation, to spend as much time here playing with it and enjoying kind of using it as much as possible. So anyway, to the next part, use case templates. These are really great because they're kind of just like your basic conversion and acquisition report templates. I think this is where they're really building out where I thought they were going to build out Freeform. But I was using these just today, and I think they do a really great job of, for instance, if you want to do your conversions by your different marketing channels or something, they work great. Lastly is the industry templates, and those are more specific to like apps or different sectors of business. Moving on, the next section is advertising. So this will be the fourth and final section of kind of the reporting. The first of which is the homepage, which we did not cover. It's essentially just a snapshot, by the way. But the fourth is advertising. So This is as direct as it really sounds. It's just 3 reports, and it's basically your website's advertising. All channels is going to visualize performance on a table and a graph, kind of like what we've seen previously. And you can also switch between those various fields, such as default channel, campaign, etc. Model comparison is the next one. Model comparison is very similar to what we saw in UA. There's first, last, linear, position, time decay, data-driven, as well as last for just Google paid. That's very familiar with what you'll see in UA. Of course, the data driving it is completely different. Although if anybody has installed both UA and GA4, you would notice that some of the numbers match closer than others, and it's quite interesting. Anyway, moving on, last part, conversion path, quite literally as it says, it's to pass the conversion. And again, we've seen a few different graphs representation. I want to jump into a quick anecdote I had at my work and kind of explain how GA kind of changing over time can be a little frustrating, and I definitely can sympathize and empathize with others that may have felt this before. So we had a specific company that we were working with, Rakuten, and Rakuten happened to come through when they had the UTM as an organic search, and we really wanted to kind of reset that to be affiliate. However, unlike in UA, GA4 didn't have the capability to customize a default channel group within the platform. Well, lo and behold, now they're going to. So we just found this updated support page recently, and then also within the settings, we found the place that the logic will be contained where you will be able to set up your own default channel groupings. So just want to point out that, yeah, you kind of always have to be on your toes with GA4 right now. And it really does seem like that's kind of technology nowadays in general. Everything seems to be more of a beta test at all times, moving to the next one. So that being said, what else is missing from UA? There's plenty to put on here, but we didn't put everything. There's a limit of 50 custom dimensions. UA had a little bit more flexibility with that. GA4 seems a little bit more difficult to navigate, at least to adapt. I think everyone was very familiar over a decade with UA, and it was a little bit more easy to navigate. The features do feel like they're a bit lacking currently, although, like I said, they're going to make new ones. Things like recurring email reports are no longer available, and others have been replaced, such as the behavioral flow report, which of course we showed you a few kind of examples of something that's like tangentially similar. And last, there's no custom annotations yet on the timeline, which can be frustrating to some. I know a lot of people liked that feature. So now we're going to run through the basic setup.